Hello, I'm the Grub Street Lodger, and finally we've reached the end of January, the longest month. A month that's given birth to gloom and bitterness and cold and despair and my sister. Truly bad month. Nah, love you, Faye. Right, we're going to look at what I have read. I started the year with The First Love Stories by Diane Wolkstein. And I'd read some of her before. In fact, I'd read her on one of these videos. I read her book of Inanna poems. So Inanna was the goddess of the city of Uruk, and some of the earliest works, in fact the very earliest named author, Enheduanna, she wrote poems about Inanna. And so I'd read those, very much enjoyed those. I thought, let's see what Diane Wolkstein does with these other books. And so one of them is Inanna, but then she also Osiris and Isis, Majnun and Layla, Tristan and Iseult, Shiva and Shakti, Shiva and Sati, and Psyche and Eros, and also a new translation of the Hebrew Song of Songs. And they are, as it says, early love stories, the first love stories. And they made me wonder what love is, to be honest, because there isn't much what I would associate with love in these stories. It's all madness and pain and insanity and desperation and hunger and selfishness and grief. And to be honest, those are not the things that I think of as love. In fact, the most real or the most like my life love in this is in the Majnun and Layla story. And it's Majnun's dad's love for him, which is caring and forgiving and encouraging. All the other loves in this are deeply, deeply damaging to everybody involved. And part of me was thinking, oh, does this mean I've never been in love? Does this mean I've never had the fire and the spark and that feeling of deep, intense love that these characters are having? Am I missing out? And I had to conclude, no, I'm not missing out, because it destroys everybody. Everybody in these stories are destroyed in some way or another, and they're destroyed by the selfishness of their love. These are loves which don't even really involve the other person. Majnun decides he loves Layla, and because of this, he goes crazy when he can't get her, and he lives his whole life in the desert chanting about her. And then he dies and is buried next to her, and that's as good as it gets for him. Or Shiva. All the other gods are reminding Shiva, hey, this Sati, she's lovely and everything, but remember, she is just part of everything, the great dance of being, of which you are, the destroying part. You are part of the great dance of being as well. You might love this part of her, but she is of the universe. Remember that, and he doesn't, and he drags her body about and stuff. Psyche and Eros. Psyche has this mysterious lover who she's not even allowed to look at, and when she does, it causes all this pain that she has to fight through to prove herself, when I don't think she really needs proving at all. Tristan and Iseult has that kind of courtly love, a love that will never win, which I think probably comes from Majnun and Layla, given the timeline and given the Crusades and things. So for the most part, the loves in this are horrid, and if that's love, I'm not really into it, I have to say. Maybe something will change my mind one day. Yeah. Song of Songs was the sweetest, and that involves comparing your lover's breasts to leaping gazelles without smirking. So there you go. Now the next thing I read had love. It was Pepys' Diary, 1666. He's a very busy boy this year, is Pepys. In fact, England's at war, and they rushed into war, and it's principally a naval war because it's against the Dutch, and Pepys works for the Navy, and the Navy is not prepared. So throughout this, he's deeply worried about his job, and deeply worried about the country, and deeply worried about the state of the Navy. And when the battles are going, he is holding his breath, and he's actually getting all his investments back, turning it into coin and silver plate, and preparing ways to sneak it out into the country, retire in the country, and get on with it without quitting. He basically wants to do, because he thinks that the Navy's in utter shit shape and he's going to get blamed for it, which is kind of unfair. It's not really his fault. He's been working really hard, but there you go. He works less hard here because the experience of the year before with the plague in 1665 has meant he's really got in the habit of just being a right git. Like, he has his wife, Elizabeth. He talks to her about my poor wife. He obviously loves her. They spend lovely times together. They have long chats in the morning. They love laying in bed and chatting about things and things like this. But when she's not there and there's some pretty people around, he's just going to go groping. And as he's getting more money and more power, he is getting more gropey. And it's disgusting and it's horrible. And while he won't take a bribe, he will grope a man's wife and then do a favour for the man to thank him for letting him grope her. And he will grope young girls, and he will, ride in a carriage and, oh dear, she's fallen on my lap. Oh, squeezy, squeezy. Like, he is not... it's disgusting. And it's a side of Pepys which is so part of the rest of Pepys. All the bits about Pepys you like is tied into this element of Pepys that you don't like. Because he is open to things. He's grasping as much experience as possible. And when this is him and his wife and everyone going out and having a great time, and him describing this absolutely crazy party where they're throwing fireworks around and dressing in drag and dancing till 4 a.m, it's good fun. But then when it's him, slyly groping people, it's not good fun. And that's always a tension. And it was a particular tension for me reading this year. Of course, the big standout set piece of 1666 is the Great Fire of London. And this is a man who was born in London. His childhood home burnt down in the fire. He knew people on every street that was burnt down. There's a real personal sense of loss, which really quickly gets brushed over because he complains a bit about prices going up and about this sort of wasteland that people are going to see. That occasionally fires are still erupting out of the basement. But he's got jobs to do, and they're in Westminster, which didn't burn down. So he's got to go and do things. He's a busy, busy boy. So yeah, Pepys is I like reading Pepys. It's a bit exhausting, because people were just flying about the city doing things. There was no email, and whether they didn't trust letters or they just preferred in-person meetings, but everyone's just zipping over around the city, meeting each other and doing things. And Pepys is one of the zippiest and doingest. Next, I read Attrib and Other Stories by Eley Williams. Eley Williams was the person who wrote the Liar's Dictionary that I read with Samuel Johnson Book Group in September or October, one of those autumnal months. And I really enjoyed the book, and I really enjoyed meeting her. She just seemed kind of cool and quirky. I thought, well, if her short stories are like her novel and like her, I'll have a good time. And I did. There is a bit of not a pattern or a formula, but she has her interests and she has her ways of seeing things, and you can kind of create the ultimate Eley Williams story. So it will be in the first person. The main character will be a woman. She'll probably be a lesbian, and she'll just experience a breakup, and then she'll see a thing or an object or something outside which will remind her of this breakup. And she'll think it and think it and overthink it and overthink it, and then the words will start becoming a bit detached from the meanings, and then there'll be all these playful word games and word salads and word soups, but not in it not meaning anything sense, because it is meaning sense. It's the whirring of the mind, and then as it settles down, these new links between things settle down, and they resolve what happened at the beginning. So she's come somewhere through that moment of overthinking, and that's generally an Eley Williams story. And some of the objects and things that provoke this overthinking are a black and white picture, or a telephone, or a dead whale, or various sort of very small items, a man's wig flying off at a train station. Then there are some other stories. There was one called Mischief, in which a woman has trained a rat to diffuse a mine, and she's laying in the sand with this rat, and they're diffusing the mine together, and it's very tense. There's another one that I really liked called "And Back Again," in which someone imagines what it would be like if they really did go to Timbuktu and back again, like in the song "I'd Do Anything," and they have a little thought about, well, would they paint their face bright blue? And that's really fun. And in fact, all of these are good fun. There's one about somebody who's losing their ability to control words, aphasia, and so as the meaning of words slides and it gets harder and harder. And that's just really fun. And then there's one about someone who has synesthesia, and her love that she meets is the person who manages to make her stop seeing the world in bright colours and just see the world as it is. Yeah, they're really good fun. They're very clever. The word games are both good and funny and interesting and not annoying. Word games can get very, very annoying, and I very much enjoyed it. The next book I read was An Anatomy of Laughter by Richard Boston, or Robert Boston. Richard Boston, who was a journalist, and I looked at some what they call death notes, his obituaries when he died. I didn't look at him when he died, never heard of him. I looked at them I haven't read this book, and his ex-wife said that he was the only man she'd ever met who laughed himself awake because his dreams were so funny. And yeah, Anatomy of Laughter. It's a little bit conservative, not in politics, but in scope. You know, it's looking at classical theories of laughter and very much sort of corpus, canon, theories, and also, you know, ideas of laughter. So he starts off with physical aspects of laughter, which he has great fun looking at old medical textbooks, like really old medical textbooks, about laughter is airing the blood out and things like this. And then he looks at things we laugh at and creates lists of different things that were popular sources of jokes at different times of history, and how some of these things you'd think, well, why would that be so funny now? But you know, we still laughed. And then what laughter does and theories of laughter. And so a lot of these theories start off quite nasty. Plato has this theory that laughter came from a sudden shift that allowed us to see how superior we are to the person we're laughing at, and that's why we laugh. And then Hobbes refines this by saying we can also do that to ourselves. We can laugh at how superior we are now to how we were. And then there was another guy who said that laughter is basically a way of policing groups, that we laugh at those who cross the line, and that keeps our group together. And actually, Richard Boston, he says, well, there is those elements of laughter. There's sort of the policing laughter and the laughing at kind of laughter, but there's also laughters of joy and play and just enjoyment. You know, that kind of laughter. So he adds that to it as well. And then he goes into some case studies. He talks about slapstick and silent films. He talks about Rabelais. He talks about Lawrence Stern. I'm going to read Tristram Shandy later in the year. And he has a whole chapter about Samuel Johnson. And weirdly, it's not how Samuel Johnson is funny. It's about how Samuel Johnson laughed. In terms of sound, apparently like a rhinoceros. In terms of loudness, very. And in terms of persistence, very, very. And I already knew he could shake people into laughter. He could just start laughing and other people would start laughing with him. And I already knew that he laughed over some very small things, some very silly things. Like, there's this bit where he finds this enormous laughter in a young friend of his making a will. And he's like, oh yeah. He goes there to the lawyer and he says to the lawyer, I am the testator. Oh, you know, I'm going to make my will. And he finds it hilarious because he also finds it terrifying. And the chapter is about how, you know, Samuel Johnson laughed to cover his fears and to cope with his fears. And it was good. The whole book was good. It was, as I say, a little bit conservative, a little bit narrow in focus. You know, it's definitely well-to-do old white dude telling you what other, you know, people in that tradition have said about laughter. But as such, it was a really good summary and it was really interesting and entertaining. And it recommended this book to me. It's called The Young Visitors. It's by Daisy Ashford. As you can see, it's very short. Daisy Ashford was 9 when she wrote The Young Visitors. And she wrote it in an exercise book, 13 chapters over 13 days. And she put it in a drawer. And her mum kept it, and when her mum died and she was clearing out her stuff, Daisy Ashford found it and went, oh, this is kind of cute, this is kind of funny, and sent it to a friend who was suffering from the flu. And her friend thought it was funny and sent it to another friend and another, and eventually one of these friends was a publisher and it was published. And so it is a 9-year-old's story, but it's not a 9-year-old writing a story for 9-year-olds. She's writing an adult story, using what she's overheard from adults talking and what she's sort of gleaned from adult novels she's read, and just her idea of what being an adult might be like. And it's really sweet and really funny, and it's included with all its spelling mistakes. The first line is a classic, actually. Where is it? See, it's such a short book that... There we go. Mr. Sortina was an elderly man of 42, and was fond of asking people to stay with him. And so Mr. Sortina asked Ethel Montague to stay with him, and then he gets sent a lovely hat from a friend of his called Bernard Clark, who is a sir. And so they go to Sir Bernard Clark's and they look around his house, and he has amazing things like a tube you can wash your hair with and cups of tea in bed. And but his own bedroom is painted dark red because he's a very sombre figure, and as he himself admits. And so Mr. Sortina decides he's not quite on the right side of the blanket, which she's saying to mean is not quite a gentleman, but which was actually a phrase meaning a bastard. But he's trying to say, I'm not quite a gentleman. And so he goes to Crystal Palace, which is sort of like a retirement home for old nobles, where people live in Crystal Palace. And they one of them trains him up to be a lord. But trouble is, he's left old Ethel with Bernard, and they get together and they have a relationship, and they get married, and Alfred cries a lot. And that's the story. And it's sort of a tragic ending to this love story. But, I mean, the declaration of love is brilliant. So, Bernard's been trying to ask her to marry him for a while now, because there's no sex or anything in this book. It's purely from a 9-year-old, and she just thinks, well, people fall in love when they get married. So he looks at her thinking, I really need to marry you. And so he asked her to marry him. And the way it's phrased is, he's been nervous about it. He took the bull by the horns and kissed her. And I don't think she was intending to mean that Ethel was a bull. There's tons of just really cool little bits like that. And for example, they're about to go out, and Ethel says, "Well, it won't take me long to get ready. I had my bath last night." And all these adults, their idea of a really good fun party is where they go and eat ice cream. It's cute and it's funny, and I liked it a lot. Okay, next thing is something I read with the Dr. Johnson book circle. It's from this book, and it is not School for Scandal, because we did that a little while ago. It was The Rivals by Richard Brinsley Sheridan. We did it in 2 parts over Zoom. One part I was Mrs. Malaprop, and another part I was Captain Absolute. I think I prefer being Mrs. Malaprop. And so it's, the usual kind of thing, lots of love, confusion, but it's all done that little bit better. It's genuinely really very good. All the servants actually know what's going on the whole way through, and they're just not helping. Captain Absolute is pretending to be Ensign Beverley, a poorer man, because he knows Lydia Languish is rich, but very romantic in her ideas, and she loves the idea of absconding. And so to get her to love him, he's got to pretend. He's the kind of person his aunt, Mrs. Malaprop, the old weather-beaten she-dragon, would not approve of. And so they fall in love like that, but at the same time his completely cartoonishly overbearing dad has actually set him up to marry her. And so he's got to sort that out. At the same time, there's all these other rivals for her affection, and it all ends with a not-quite duel. When we were reading it, one of the things we were surprised is that there's a character called Lucy, who's a lady's maid, who's at the beginning of the book, but not at all at the end of the book. And she's really funny. She's caused half the problems just because she's taken all this money in to send letters and not really doing it. Or doing it wrong just for a laugh. And then there's a guy called Falkland. Falkland is a man of feeling. He's very sensitive. And he's really, really, really annoying. Because he can never be happy. So he hears about his love Julia, and she's away from him. Or he's away from her. And he's really upset. Oh, will she ever survive without me? Oh, I'm going to die without her. And then is told that no, she was all right. She was happy, she was fun, she was laughing, she was dancing. And he's like, oh, is this love? Is this love if that's what she's doing? And whatever she does is not right. And it was a brilliant moment when she split up with him and said, "Sod it, your games are just stupid. Go." But this being a romantic comedy, they get together at the end, so that wasn't so good. Lydia and Captain Absolute also get together, and it was a little bit flat, to be honest. I never particularly believed that they were that keen on each other themselves, but I'm sure they'll get on all right. And then poor old Mrs. Malaprop, she's famous for getting her words wrong, and sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it's not. I like the allegory on the banks of the Nile. I wasn't that keen on the pineapple. Right, the last thing I read took all of the second half of January. God, that's a long way to put it. Took 50. Anyway, it was Francois Rabelais, Gargantua, and Pantagruel, which technically is 5 books, but yeah, it's one. Also, what's weird about it is the first book written is the second book. The second book written is the first book, and then the next 3 are there. But the last book, the 5th one, may not be by Rabelais. Anyway, so what's it about? It's about some giants. In the first one, it's about Daddy Giant. Second one, it's about Son Giant. They both have quite similar stories, really. They go to Paris, they get an education, they come back to their land and have to fight for it against some invader. And that's basically it. And it involves pissing at some point. People were drowned in piss because they're giants. And everything is about piss and shit in this book. And then in the third one, Pantagruel's servant, Panurge, decides he wants to get married, but he's worried that he might get cuckolded. And so he goes to lots of different oracles and wise people and asks them, will I get cuckolded? And they all say yes. But he doesn't like the answer, so he keeps going. And then he decides he wants to ask the oracle in the bottle. And so the next 2 books are travelling to different worlds as they get on the way to Oracle of the Bottle to discover if Panurge will get cuckolded. The story's not really important. It's pre-novel, it's not a novel. It's just things that happen to people. And actually Panurge takes over from Pantagruel quite early in the book. It's full of piss and shit and bollocks and dicks and testicles. No, still bollocks. Bumholes and vomit and snot. Not much snot, actually. Not as much snot as you'd think. And queefing and farting and things like that. And sometimes there are just lists. He loves a list. Here's a list of all the different kinds of ball bags, if I can find it. I remember a velvety ball bag, a wrinkled ball bag, a tight ball bag. I can't find the list of ball bags, but it's just a 4-page list of different kinds of ball bags. And the joke is largely, people, they have bodies, and bodies can be kind of noisy and smelly and awkward and dangly and painful. And that's one of the big jokes in the book. And he likes mixing this particular joke with one, the main characters are giants, so when they shit, they shit. And when they eat, they eat. Everyone eats loads in this book. Everyone loves eating. They love drinking. They like to guzzle. Loads and loads of drink. Rabelais, in this translation, refers to his readers as the boozers. Come on, boozers. I think it probably would have been better translated to pissheads. So that the first sort of sentence of this book is, oi, pissheads. And yet there is a meaning to all this stuff. Sorry, I'm just getting comfy here. There is a meaning to all this stuff. It's all about bigness. It's all about be big, be magnanimous, be generous, be open. Love the fact, that the world has experiences and enjoy your experiences, and eat and drink and laugh and have fun and have sex and piss and shit and do whatever you need to do, and just enjoy doing it because it's all there for you. And that's a really nice message. But it's not really a book about a message. I think it's a book that just wants to waste your time. And that sounds like a terrible thing. It wants to waste your time. I really think that's what it does. I think Rabelais just wants you to waste your time. A few good jokes, a few bad jokes, a few mediocre jokes, quite a few jokes that, to be honest, this is 500 years old, this book. Jokes about the intricacies of medieval French legal practice. Not gonna get me too much. Though the ones where the lawyers are transformed into cats and they become clawyers and they want to claw you, that's funny. But yeah, a lot of the jokes don't quite work now. It's very blokish. It's the attitude to women's pretty vile, to be honest. I was gonna say they're just sort of holes to be filled, but they love being filled. All the women in this just love sex, and it fits with the rest of the characters because everyone just loves pleasure, and the ones that don't are the small petty ones that we laugh at. Maybe we drown them, maybe we hit them, and maybe we staple their balls to the wall. It's rough, it's silly, it's occasionally kind of thoughtful, and it just wants you to waste your time happily and to enjoy life and everything that life has. And as such, I don't think even though it's in no way I would recommend it as a modern way of living, there is something there that we need to remember. And I did enjoy the tone of the book and the point of the what the book was trying to do more than I enjoyed the book itself. And you can see how it influenced Tristram Shandy. When I get to it, that would be so obvious, especially the direct to the author, direct to the reader stuff, and the digressions and everything, and also Gulliver's Travels. I mean, the whole last two books in this book are essentially Gulliver's Travels. So I can see why it's a great thing in history and why it's influenced a certain strand of writing throughout history. And there's a bit of me that wants to include a bit of Rabelaisian, over-the-top orgy of food, drink, and fun. But at the same time, it has dated. It's very old, this book, and it's written by a monk who quit 2 monkhoods and then became a doctor. So, sex jokes by a monk, I mean, they're going to be a bit... Yeah. It's really good, though, honestly. But it's really good. You don't need to read... It's very difficult. You don't need to read it, but it's very good. I'm glad I read it. There we go. So, shortest month next. We'll see where we go with it. I look forward to it. The other thing that I've started is I've started reviewing plays. So, the week after next, I'm seeing 3 plays in a row, which might slow my reading down a little. But will give me lots of fun plays to see, so that's all good. Anyway, first month of the year done. Hope it's all going well for you. It's going pretty well for me.